Okay, let's take a few more questions. Sir.
Yes, my name is Joe McCarthy. I'm an Army Fellow with the Georgetown Public Policy Institute. My question's in response to Brian's comment that there are varying reports in the United States media in regards to progress of the Afghan strategy. With that said, what are the critical metrics that can accurately measure whether we are successful or failing in Afghanistan?
Thank you. Next question over here.
My name is Lucas Hansen. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an Afghanistan-Pakistan analyst. And during the summer, there was a lot of talk about trying to rout out corruption. It became more highlighted in the press, I think. And then towards the end of the summer, maybe September, there were several articles saying that we were going to try to shift focus away from trying to push them so much because there was resistance from Karzai. Instead, try and work through the top of the government to have them rout out the corruption kind of quietly, going through the ranks themselves and putting trust in them to do that. A lot of the panelists talked about corruption, trying to go from bottom up. Do you see there being any possibility that that quiet, top-down approach will work or help or be counterproductive?
Okay, and we'll take a couple more. Stephen, I think that question should be for you, though. Dennis?
Right. Dennis Cooks from the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'm wondering to ask the panel, what do you think the prospects are for our getting the Pakistanis to shut down the use of FATA and other border areas as a safe haven for the militants? And if we fail, what are our prospects for success in Afghanistan?
Okay, and we'll do one more. Hassan, I think that should be yours. And one more over here. And then we'll turn it over to our panelists.
Mine is a two-pronged question. One is relating to the civilian the infrastructure build-up. Would you agree that we've overly relied on contractors, both in terms of a local strongman who we'd give the money to spread out and build the sewer system, as opposed to a plain old-fashioned New Deal type WPA, where the goal is to spread out the money to the maximum degree? And a quick thumbnail calculation indicates that we could pay every Afghan male $3,000 a year for the mere sum of $30 billion a year. And would that be more effective? And the add-on to this question is, in something like say, Northwest Pakistan, to shut down the madrasas. I'm just beginning to throw out a wild idea here, but what if the kids go there to get food? Why don't we just take 100 old planes out of the desert, jetliners, load them up with MREs and fly over there every day as a regular school lunch run, and meanwhile include some MP3 players that have the Quran on there and some benign interpretations, so that way they could learn the Quran, they could get fed, and they wouldn't be in madrasas.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Brian for the first question on metrics.
Yeah, and maybe Steve can jump in here, but I think part of one thing that Paul said in terms of our goal and end state and the lack of clarity of it, and it's something that's concerned me for a while, which feeds into the metrics. I think the president has been quite right to articulate a broader goal of disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The question of what does that actually mean in terms of what we need to build to leave behind to achieve that, I think is still unanswered, both within government and in the larger analytical community here. And if anyone disagrees with that. But that end state question, which we've raised in reports and others have, really, I think, hampers the ability to measure then. If you don't know what you're trying to build, if you don't know, we have, I think, a decent metric in terms of how many forces, Afghan national security forces, we want to have by 2011, 2012, and 2013. And I think there's some way to measure the progress in terms of their capacity and their numbers and their ability to and willingness to stay in the fight. So those critical metrics, I think, in building are much stronger on the security side. On the governance side, I think this is very much a work in progress, and I think we need greater clarity. But when you get down to it, if you're looking at it from a coin framework, it is not capture kills. It is how secure does the population feel, and maybe Steve can add to this. There are, various metrics that look at, how long have markets, do they stay open, and a range of issues. And you can really get deep into it, largely based on how safe the population feels. But I think circling back, in absence of a broader, clearly defined end state to help us achieve that goal of disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in both countries, we still will be wallowing in this sense of, well, we're not sure if we're doing better or we're worse. There'll be various narratives that I think will try to frame our debate here, much in the way that I think we saw in Iraq, because certainly the security has improved in Iraq, but a lot of the things in terms of basic services and the capacity of the government to deliver, or the political grievances that divide societies, like we see in Iraq, endure even after the success of the military success of the surge. So I think this is the place where we need more critical thinking, and it's particularly on the government capacity side.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so each of you have to answer your question in 1 minute. Steve?
Okay, just a very quick point on metrics and end states, and then a quick point on contractors. Brian is absolutely right. The end state debate is underdeveloped. I do think there are attainable, acceptable end states one can articulate for Afghanistan. I commend to your attention a piece that with 2 co-authors I wrote in Foreign Affairs 2 issues ago that seeks to define what is the intersection between the acceptable and the achievable with respect to ultimate political conditions in Afghanistan. And we argue that there are several very differentiated largely by the scale of decentralization of governance in the country, any of which involve walking back to an important degree from the extremely ambitious end state goals that the Bush administration adopted, which are ambitious to the point of unfeasibility. But there are ways of walking back that I think get us into the domain of the feasible, but leave us within the domain of the acceptable. We could talk about specific metrics along the way to get there. Let me just suggest very briefly, though, that if you believe that governance reform is critical in order to get to any of these end states, which I think it is, the key is measuring how well or badly we're doing on that, and that requires intelligence work to do things like uncover the size of the illicit economy, determine what the current payment required to get a district police chief job in Kandahar is this year as opposed to last year. I mean, I think there are a variety of things that can tell you quite a bit about how you're doing and are not in principle unknowable, but which will require a substantial redirection of our intelligence system relative to current priorities. Let me just briefly close with a word on contractors. Yes, absolutely, we are over-reliant on contractors. And one of the central dimensions of military activity required to get governance reform is one of the primary ways in which we are dependent on contractors right now is to deliver the logistical resources required to keep our military functioning and to provide the security for the convoys that move those resources around the country. At the moment, this is done overwhelmingly with local contracting. The local contractors who do this, especially providing the security, create, in effect, private armies for the use of the networks we're dealing with to act as the muscle to enforce their edicts with the local population. This is tremendously undermining of our success in the undertaking, but if we are going to deal with it, it is probably going to require that we are going to have to take military assets out of orthodox population security and put them into logistical activity, and especially securing that logistical activity. One of the reasons why governance reform is, in fact, a military mission, with important costs and trade-offs against the conduct of security operations, is because if we continue to insist on the use of contractors to provide the support for that security activity, we will make governance improvement in all likelihood impossible. There's a trade-off, it requires some choices, and I think we're going to have to make those choices in favor of prioritizing governance activity with respect to the use of our military resources in ways that we have not in the past.
Paul, do you think you could pick up on the question about approaching Karzai more quietly on the corruption issues? Do you feel comfortable talking?
Oh, I was going to use my last minute just to compliment one of the other questioners on his creativity about things like airdrops of MREs and MP3 players and a $3,000 stipend. I mean, whether those are good ideas or not, I think it's a useful way of making the point and underscoring the point that all too little attention has been given to this war in cost-benefit terms and exactly what the costs are and what we are buying with that. And perhaps some of these ideas would be a better way to buy some of what we're trying to buy.
Great, thank you. And Hassan, do you want to pick up on
Yes,
Dennis's?
I think it is, unfortunately, tragically, quite unlikely that Pakistan will be able to tackle the tribal areas in next 5 to 7 years. It is partly failure, it is partly incompetence, it is partly all those previous peace deals, inverted commas, those deals which allowed those militants to expand their influence, and US policy at that time was too focused on Iraq. We have no time to get into that. But having said that, I would argue that failure in the Pakistani tribal areas, or the long time that it will take, if all the right decisions are taken today, it will still take 5 to 10 years to resolve that. But that doesn't mean that US cannot succeed in Afghanistan. All the wrongs that are taking place in Afghanistan cannot be blamed in Pakistan. One example, I seriously doubt, and this is something unconventional against the conventional belief that I'm saying, but this is just as a food for thought, I very much doubt that Mullah Umar, whether he is in tribal areas in Pakistan, or whether he's in Quetta, or whether he's in Islamabad, that Mullah Umar is the one who's running insurgency in Afghanistan. No, insurgency in Afghanistan and militancy in Afghanistan is happening because there's new second generation of leadership. Mullah Umar is not the one who's, Haqqani, yes, to some extent. So the point is, there are still ways, despite that lack of possibility of improving things in FATA, there's success in Afghanistan, there are other metrics. There are other reasons which can allow that to happen.
I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the Middle East Institute.
Thank you, Caroline, and I want to thank our panelists for making this conference such a success, and thank you all for joining us today. You helped us break an MEI record. We registered over 1,000 registrants. So thank you once again. Please do support MEI so we can do more conferences and programs like these and continue to debate the challenges of the Middle East, and we'll see you next year.